Welcome everyone to the Community IT Innovators webinar series. We're so happy you could join us today for today's webinar on protecting your nonprofit from financial fraud. We're excited to partner with your part-time controller for this webinar to get some of the best financial processes advice from them on how to add another layer of protection on top of IT and technical preventative measures. We're going to talk about wire fraud in particular today with some examples, but we'll cover other scams and schemes also. We want to try and make these webinars as interactive as possible. We have a lot of content that we're going to try to get through today, but please don't hesitate to use the Q&A tool as part of the Zoom webinars to ask your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them today during the webinar. We know you have lots of questions. We'll also be recording today's webinar, and the recording will be made available on our website. So don't worry too much about taking notes. After the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link, and it'll also be posted to our YouTube channel. And the podcast episode will be posted in 2 parts within a week. If you happen to be watching on YouTube right now, we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you'll get updates every time we post a new webinar. And we also invite you to subscribe to our email list. We don't send a lot of emails. We just send updates on the webinars that are coming up that we offer. So you can attend in real time and ask your questions as you can today. We have a lot of free resources and downloadable material on our website too. Before we begin, if you're not familiar with Community IT, just a little bit about us. We are a 100% employee-owned managed services provider. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations, and our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish your missions through the effective use of technology. We have about 40 staff, and we started in the DC metropolitan area over 20 years ago, and we now serve nonprofits across the US. We're technology experts, and we are consistently named a top 500 managed services provider by Channel Futures. And that's an honor that we received again in 2021. So let's get into the webinar today. You can see the slide today with our learning objectives. And I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Carole Woodard, and I'm the Marketing Director at Community IT and also the moderator for today's webinar. Before working in marketing, I was a project manager here. And before that, I was the IT director at a large international nonprofit and a program director at a small national nonprofit, where I was the point of contact as a client of Community IT back in the day. So I have been on both sides of the table, and I love how Community IT has a lot of staff here with experience working at nonprofits. And we really get the community and the constraints and opportunities and needs. Many of you submitted questions at registration, which our panelists will do their best to answer. If you have questions during the presentation, I'll be monitoring the Q&A in the chat, and we will leave a few minutes at the end to answer anything we don't get to earlier. I'm joined today by Carole Melvin from your part-time controller, Yptc. Carole, do you want to introduce yourself? And I think Matt, we need to, yeah.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good afternoon. My name is Carole Melvin. I'm a senior manager and market leader for Yptc's Washington, D.C. office. I began my career as an auditor for Deloitte, and I am a CPA, much like many of my colleagues at Yptc. We are ex-auditors, and many of us are CPAs. My combined nonprofit experience includes 20 years of accounting, auditing, and audit management, budgeting, and best practices in nonprofit board administration, including serving as CFO for several nonprofit organizations. And like Carolyn, there's another parallel. I also was a client of Yptc before jumping over to the other side. So in my current position at Yptc, I serve as the senior manager market leader for the DC, Maryland, and Virginia region. I facilitate relationships with clients and staff, conduct practice development, and I also provide accounting, reporting, and management services to nonprofit clients myself. I'm a member of the AICPA, the American Institute of CPAs, and the Greater Washington Society of CPAs, and I serve as a member of the GWSCPA nonprofit section. A little bit about Yptc. Your part-time controller is a professional services firm that specializes in nonprofit financial management with nearly 30 years of nonprofit expertise. next year. We will celebrate 30 years. Our services include accounting, reporting, data visualization, and best practices, to name just a few. We have over 1,000 clients currently located throughout the US, as well as clients in several other countries. We are a staff of over 300 and growing, working in our 8 regional offices and in our YPTC Anywhere nationwide virtual office, serving clients on site or remotely, providing nonprofits with accounting services nationwide. And we are very proud to be voted a best place to work for over a decade. And this past year, we were named to Accounting Today's list of best accounting firms to work for. And now I will turn it over to Matt to introduce himself.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, Carole. It's really good to have you join me today to talk about a topic about combating wire fraud. My name is Matthew Eshleman. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Community IT, and I've just celebrated my 20 years with the company. I actually have a little bit of time before that as an intern, and have now been in my current role for a while, and really focus on helping our internal team manage the IT infrastructure for the 140 clients and 6,500 people that we support, and then also am a resource for organizations to help them manage their cybersecurity as well. So I look forward to getting into lots of great content today. We've got a lot packed in here, and I think it's going to be a really valuable and engaging session. As Carole mentioned, or Carolyn mentioned, feel free to chat in questions as they come along. But first, I actually do have a poll for you. Would love to get a sense of who's attending the webinar today. So go ahead and just take a minute or so to quickly respond in terms of what is your role at your organization, you in the IT department, finance, operations, other, admin. So just to get a sense of who is attending the webinar today. We've got a lot of content, I think, for all interested parties. So it looks like we're pretty evenly distributed here in terms of people playing lots of different roles at their organization. So that is fantastic. Today we are going to be talking a little bit. We'll start with a little bit of the cybersecurity landscape. We'll talk a little bit specifically about wire fraud and what that means and how organizations can protect themselves. We're going to show some specific examples. I think it's particularly helpful to kind of see how these types of attacks are perpetrated, and perhaps you'll see some techniques that seem very reflective of what you've experienced at your own organization. And then finally, we're going to talk about how to protect your organization. So I think it's really important to move from understanding these concepts to talking about the specific steps that you can take at your organization to help protect the data and your organization's finances. So jumping in and talking a little bit about the cybersecurity landscape, if you've been on our webinars, some of these things may seem, we like to start with laying this groundwork. So what we see as an organization, as I said, that supports about 6,500 nonprofit staff, is that we see that there are persistent and ongoing attacks against your online digital identity. So if you can log into something from the cloud, it means the bad guys can too. And so we see that happening all the time. We also see that organizations are targeted with really sophisticated spear phishing, and we'll go into that in more detail as part of the presentation. We also see that organizations are targeted because of the work that they do. Mostly that applies to kind of think tank and policy groups. I think especially with some of the current political environment that we are seeing now with Russia and the Ukrainian threat. We're seeing organizations that work on international issues specifically targeted. And then we also see schemes targeting vendors such as ourselves, and I think vendors like YPTC as well, that have access and insight into a great number of organizations. So organizations like ourselves are targeted as well. We also see that organizations are not always aware of all of the new security tools. There are lots of good products out there that can help organizations combat these increasing security threats. And I think we also see that nonprofit organizations generally have fewer cybersecurity fraud controls in place. We also know that a lot of nonprofit organizations have not taken those proactive steps to implement things such as an incident response plan. And so that data comes from N10's cybersecurity report from back in 2018. And so that is something that we see pretty commonly across the organizations that we're working with. And then we also know that there is a real impact to these a real financial impact of these threats to nonprofit organizations. So fraud is not just something that happens to somebody else or happens to only big organizations, but we see that data from Kaspersky's small to mid-sized business impact shows that there are direct costs of about $149,000 associated with cyber incidents. So Carole, are there things that you see in the work that you do as well here?
Yeah, and that really mirrors what we are seeing, Matt. So we know that nonprofits can be particularly attractive targets for fraudsters. We know that often executive directors who are passionate about their missions are often naturally trusting of others who share their interest or at least pretend to. And board members who are dedicated and talented in their particular fields may not be as well versed in financial issues and internal controls in some cases. And we also know that nonprofits of all sizes may have limited resources available to address the internal controls. So that $149,000 that you mentioned could potentially be very devastating to some of these small nonprofits. And this makes them vulnerable to those who use as an opportunity to commit fraud. And as you said, nonprofits are particularly vulnerable because they think it will never happen to them. We had one case of a client, and this was in the early days of the pandemic. Seems like a long time ago, but in the summer of 2020, one of our clients, and this was in the news, so I'm not breaking any confidentiality here, but one of our clients, Phil Abundance, who provides food to people in need in Philadelphia, where they were scammed out of nearly $1 million in a cyber attack. And this was at a time when they were serving far more people than ever before because of the pandemic. And, here they are serving this great need. And then to prey upon a social philanthropic organization, it's almost unthinkable, but that's why we're talking about this, because we do have to think about it. So we'll discuss this, the details of this case a little bit later in our presentation. But as you said, Matt, these the fishers who targeted Phil Abundance, they were sophisticated, and it can happen to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the data that we take a look at, this is provided from the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. And so this shows just the increase in the amount of cyber crime over time. So here we can see, starting in 2016, there was about $1.5 billion worth of cybercrime activity. You take that all the way up into 2020, and we're now at 4.2 billion. So that's as Carole helpfully added in here, over 165% increase of kind of direct total losses. And so this is not something that just happens to somebody else. This is something that happens to organizations within the community that we serve, and that rate is only increasing. So this is something that we also keep tabs on and is mirrored by our own data. The number of cyber attacks that we see launched against our nonprofit clients is not going down over time, but it is in fact continues to go up. I think it's also important for organizations to understand that this is a cyber criminal enterprise. This is not just the genius hacker in somebody's basement doing this for kind of fun, but there are in fact organized cybercrime adversaries that are well funded, and this is a business venture for them. So up here I have some iconography from CrowdStrike, which is an endpoint detection and response group. These adversaries represent Fancy Bear, which is a Russian-based hacking group that goes after or is a state-sponsored actor that goes after international groups and businesses. And then also we've got Cozy Bear, which is another Russian-based group, along with Pinchy Spider, which is responsible for a lot of ransomware attacks. And we also, actually just today, some reporting came out that actors such as Evil Corp is responsible for over $100 million in earning from cybercrime. And so we can when we think about this as not being, opportunistic hacking, but really focused criminal enterprises, I think it can help to change our perspective and the protections that we need to have in place to help combat these threats. And when we think about cybersecurity, this is a graphic that we use at Community IT quite a lot, where we talk about cybersecurity protections really being first rooted in policy and then training and awareness for staff. That's really our first line of defense. Then once we have that out of the way, or invested in, then we can focus on some of the other technical areas where there may be some specific technology solutions in place related to protecting your digital identity, the data that your organization has, the devices that you're using, your network perimeter, such as it is, that could be at an office, or now perhaps that's your home or just your personal office, the web protections. And then after we have those things in place, then it may be appropriate to move on to next gen tools. But we really want to root the protections that we put in place at our organizations with policy and training.
Right. And that training is so important because the technology and the process controls, are useless if we don't have the humans that are involved actually, employing those practices. So we know many nonprofits have sensitive data about the vulnerable people that they serve in their missions, but are they doing a good job of securing it? And it's really important to note that as nonprofits think about this, they need to think about this across the organization. This is not solely the IT department's problem or the finance department's concern, and it includes beyond the development and the fundraising folks as well. It's the program folks, it's everyone's job to be aware and follow the policy. We know of one nonprofit that sent an email with an unencrypted file that included personal information about their constituents, sexual assault survivors. So, what happens when a leak of those child sex abuse survivors' names, gets leaked, or domestic abuse survivors get posted on some list? The results could be catastrophic, even deadly. So you need to ask yourself if you're treating that data with the respect it deserves, and are we taking the necessary steps to prevent that? We also know that often nonprofits will have either some homegrown or customized software systems that may also make them more likely to be vulnerable. And they don't often have that dedicated IT person, and someone in the organization will be charged with putting together the security policy. So it's really, there's a lot of different pressures on the nonprofits. And another one is that another pressure in the cybersecurity landscape is that donors want nonprofits to spend only a certain amount of money on overhead. And they don't realize that their own contributions may be at risk because nonprofits may not have the ability to protect that data or the funds that they get from those donors. We are starting to see that change, especially in the last few years. We've seen some of the larger foundations actually establish cyber initiatives to respond to growing cyber threats. So we are seeing a response to this increase in cyber activity that Matt showed us.
Yeah, I think that is an encouraging trend to see. And then I think it's also, I think good that we're having, kind of this joint webinar because I think this is one of those areas where, responding to wire fraud, it's not just a technology issue, it's not just a finance issue, but it's something that many different departments need to work on and collaborate together in order to have the best protection. So we'll take another opportunity to ask a poll question here. So for you in your organization, have you experienced any of these types of cyber attacks? So whether that be spam or spear phishing or an account compromise, whenever somebody else other than the intended person has had access to your account, uh, maybe your organization has been impacted by kind of the standard malware or virus activity, or maybe ransomware, or maybe you or your organization has been a victim of wire fraud. It'd be good just to understand uh, the landscape and see where it mirrors some of the broader trends that we see. So give folks just a few more seconds to respond in. This is multiple choice, and it would not be unexpected if your organization maybe has been victimized by some or all of these different controls here. So thanks for that response, and we'll share the results so you can see everybody's experience. And so again, not uncommon or maybe unexpected. I would expected 100% of organizations to say that they've seen spam or spear phishing attacks. Again, about 15% of organizations have had an account compromise. 20%, virus malware, 33% up into that range. About 15% of the respondents have said they've been their organization's been a victim of wire fraud, and then a small percentage, 6%, has experienced ransomware. And I would say that really does, I think, mirror our own experience of trends. So one of the things that we'll be talking about, and I'll actually be doing a presentation on in 2 months, is just the continuing trend of our nonprofit incident report. And so here we can see there are two scalings of the data here, but we can see that yes, most organizations, or we see a lot of attacks that are email based. So again, spam and spear phishing, with a significant number of account compromises occurring, and that number has been increasing over time. And that number, will, as I was looking at the data from 2021, continues to increase. So that's something that we're really attentive to. Overall, the number of wire fraud attacks or successful wire fraud cases that we see where an organization has suffered some financial loss is low overall. But as Carole mentioned, that amount or that loss can really be significant. So if an organization sends $1 million out the door, that's a tremendous financial loss. And then we are seeing an increasing sophistication in the kind of number and maybe near misses of those wire fraud attacks that our organizations experience. So let's have Carole talk a little bit about asking some of those questions to help better understand your organization's risk profile.
Thanks, Matt. So, if you are a nonprofit, it's very likely that you are processing donations. You may have online event registrations. You are most likely storing some sort of personal information for program participants, collecting information on donors, or membership subscribers, initiating online vendor payments. And if so, your entity is at risk for cybersecurity threats. We know that two main reasons that nonprofits are ideal targets for hackers and cyber criminals. We mentioned that one, they don't see themselves as target, and therefore don't prepare adequately often. And two, cyber criminals, as Matt said, they're very sophisticated. They view nonprofits as easy prey, sitting on a wealth of personal information about their support staff, donors, volunteers, and the communities that they serve. Donor records, sensitive client data, confidential details about employees are all at risk of threat. And we know that if nonprofits weren't paying attention before, or they weren't prioritizing that in their budget, due to limited resources. That complacency may have ended after the 2020 ransomware attack on Blackbaud, which many of our nonprofit clients use as a financial system, Blackbaud and Razor's Edge. And this affected many organizations, charities in the United States. So, it may have been nice to have for some nonprofit organizations, but now cybersecurity policies and protection is a must-have. Because we know that for nonprofits, reputation is everything. If an organization suffers a breach because it was careless with data, they're going to lose donors, and that nonprofit's reputation and the ability to raise money, may be forever jeopardized. So it really is, it is really critical. And, that sort of brings to the forefront a lot of these data protection laws. So if you are, doing any of the following on this slide, you do need to become aware and make sure you're following data protection laws. So in general, these laws require businesses who maintain personal information to have safeguards in place to protect that personal information, have protocols in place to notify individuals if a data breach does occur. And there's not really one all-encompassing federal data privacy law. There are some like HIPAA that covers healthcare, but every state will have different data breach legislation. Maryland, Virginia, New York have all, increased their, broadened their cybersecurity legislation. But even if your nonprofit doesn't have a physical presence in a particular state, if it's collecting personal information about a resident of that state, it typically must comply with that state's laws. So you may need to research other individual state laws as well.
Great. So we'll talk a little bit now about some specific examples so that we can start putting these kind of top level concepts into practice. And so the first thing that we'll talk about is what the FBI calls business email compromise. And so this is their infographic that kind of talks about how these adversaries or these threat actors will identify a target. So again, many nonprofit organizations do a great job on their website of highlighting the great staff that work there and the different roles that they play, which is a great thing to do. However, it's also used by these cyber threat actors to find out who the accounts payable person is, who are the finance people, and then use that information to craft specially tailored emails that are designed to elicit a response and designed to get people to take action on that. So if they can establish that communication, establish that conversational engagement, then they're able to then leverage that into getting somebody to take an action that they're kind of coerced or tricked into taking.
Right. And we've seen in our organization that, thieves and scammers will always try to capitalize on a crisis. And certainly the COVID-19 pandemic has been no exception. Anti-fraud experts have seen a rise in these phishing scams, and we've seen that play out in a number of our clients as well. So getting back to that example, of Phil Abundance, just as Matt just explained, the scammers made their request appear legitimate using real details and information that was specific to the business. And sometimes it's not always clear where they obtained that information, but in this case, Phil Abundance was going through a construction project. They were nearing completion of a $12 million community kitchen, a project that was visible to the public. So the thieves infiltrated their computer, the Philabundance computer system, and then they put in controls that blocked the legitimate emails from the construction, from the contractors. They blocked those from getting through, and then the final step was the spoofing email that mimicked the invoice from the construction company. So it was very clever and sophisticated. Philabundance was expecting a real invoice. So when that invoice for $923,000 came in, they paid it. Of course, it's often impossible to get that money back. So we've seen a number of other incidents very similar to this, where the cyber thieves infiltrate an organization's email server. They create fake invoices that mimic the real vendors. We saw another case this past year where the scammers posed as a large consulting firm who was actually doing work for the organization. They sent the invoice with instructions to wire the money to the thieves' account, and the folks in the accounts payable did that. They sent the money to the thieves' account. We've also seen another case where thieves, again, using email to gain access, pretended to be a valid current employee, asking for a change in direct deposit, of course, going to the scammer's account. So we know that, we tell our clients never send money via wire transfer, money order, or prepaid debit card like Green Dot Money Pack without first verbal or visual verification, because these methods of payment provide little or no recourse for scam victims. And they present real obstacles for law enforcement in identifying the thief. So you always, we'll talk more about how to help prevent. Of course, we can never always fully prevent fraud from happening, but we do have some helpful tips later on. And so I'll just mention other creative examples we've seen. We've seen thieves posing as health and human service employees, offering to put people on vaccine waiting lists last year, for a fee, or offering to sell or ship vaccine doses, and falsifying invoices of sales of COVID-19 medical equipment. And then, of course, last year, we also saw, or 2020, we saw a lot about of scams about the misuse of the PPP loan monies. So they get really clever. They're constantly upping their game and changing. So it's there's a lot of incidents that you need to keep up with.
Yeah, so let's take a look at some of those specific examples that I think we see on a fairly regular basis.
Sure. So this example, this email or text message may look like it's from a company that you know or trust. It might be from a vendor, a bank, a credit card company, a social networking site, an online payment website or app. And they often, will tell you a story to trick you into clicking on a link or opening an attachment. They may say that they've noticed some suspicious activity or login attempts, claim that there's some problem with your account. They include a fake invoice, as we've talked about, and they want you to click on a link to make a payment. We've just recently seen text messages. This is becoming even more frequent than the emails, it seems like. And again, it's also hard to tell whether that is real or fake. And then, in all of this, we're trying to, to help you prevent and detect. So as we said before, there is the the human element. So we always want to talk about not just in the wire fraud or cybersecurity, but the greater fraud landscape. Is we always want to have promote environment of healthy skepticism. So if you get that email from the executive director, asking you to wire transfer money immediately, you need to have that that moment where you think about, in the training that you've learned, would my executive director really, just email me and ask me to do that, or would they most likely call, or or Zoom or call or text. So we need to train people to look for some of those phishing schemes, such as the misspellings, the grammatical errors, and Matt's going to talk a little bit more about that. There's ways you can, help detect a spoofed email address by hovering over it. We tell clients use forward instead of reply. So you are forced to type in a known email address. And always, don't return calls to an unfamiliar phone number. Make sure you look up the company phone number from a reliable source.
Yeah, so I think those are all good tips. And now we're going to actually take a look at an incident that we responded to at Community IT with an organization, actually a sponsored organization for one of our clients. And so here, here's the gotcha. So names have been updated to obfuscate who is targeted here. But again, I'm sure many of you have seen similar things that look like this. From the executive assistant at what we now know is a compromised domain to the executive assistant at a foundation that was providing grant funding. They CC'd the managing director and the executive director at the compromised organization. So, hi, hey, we've made some changes to our payment information, disregard previous payment, and let's see if we can proceed with getting you the updated information. So from there, we'll go and take a look at the actual email thread that occurred in this case. So, here we can see that original email thread. So we can see that it starts off with from the executive director to the managing director. Then the managing director at the foundation is replying. They follow up. Any news? Let's make sure that we can get the payment information. We need to schedule some time. So this is in Wednesday in August. All right. Now the executive assistant then responds, hey, sorry about that. We've had a delay in processing. We've got a glitch in our system. Invoice is approved. First invoice is approved. Second invoice has been uploaded. Then we can see, obviously people are busy. We can't talk to the executive director. Let's find some time to talk. We get a nice response. Sure, we understand. Let's figure things out. When can we get together? And we know around this time basically is the executive director at the organization along with the executive assistant all had compromised accounts. And so this is the hacker or the fraudster is engaging with the organization or with the foundation. So now we have kind of the ask. So we know that the account has been compromised. They've been watching all the communications, and now they're inserting themselves into the conversation to direct the foundation to update the payment information so that the funds could be directed into the fraudster's account and not the nonprofit's account. So the executive assistant follows up, followed by the executive director following up on the same email, right? So the executive director account is also compromised and is following up. So now the foundation has received communications from two people at the organization asking to change the payment information. The foundation replies, hey, we can do that. we need to have a name, an email, and phone number. We're going to DocuSign it. It's clear that they're following some established procedures to update payment information. Now we get into the executive director is, hey, due to time difference, and so this is a UK-based organization. So here's the person, our new account person. Her name is Angela Bergdorf. They can only be contacted by email because of time differences. And then again, if you're paying attention, there's a misspelling there. They do provide a new email address. So in this case, it was actually like accounts payable at the organization. So the hacker created a new account to use, and then also provided a phone number so that they could confirm the payment information. All right, so then the executive assistant at the foundation replied, all right, we've passed that information along. The executive assistant, hey, we need to confirm, and so we're going to call. Can you give us that phone number again? So the hacker is replying, here's the bank information, it's ACH. Here's my contact information. So again, they're instructing the foundation to contact them. We can see the executive director is following up again, like, hey, we've requested these changes. Is it updated yet? The hacker is reaching out saying, hey, I can't get in touch with you. Can you help me figure out what's going on? As technology goes, the executive assistant at the foundation is having tech problems. And so her carrier has been down. And so they don't have access to the laptop. And so they're now just getting access to it. So again, there's some back and forth. The hacker is following up saying, give me a call. Here's my number. To validate the conversation or the change, we can see the executive assistant is having some problems getting in touch with the hacker. Again, can you give me a call back? We got bad reception. You can just kind of see this happening over the course of time. Here's the updated phone number. The hackers now provides them an office and a mobile number for the accounts receivable. Being very helpful to provide contact information. I mean, you can almost see the person, like they know they're getting paid like really soon. And so there's some urgency. So they're following up again. All right. So it looks like, Angela Bergdorf has now they got confirmation. So they went through a validation process. They updated the ACH payment information. They deleted the prior information as instructed. Now we see the hackers following up saying, hey, thanks. When can we expect the payment? And then the executive director, also compromised, is also following up. When can we expect payment? The executive assistant is looping in the grants accountant at the foundation along with the controller and the managing director, right? Hey, when are we going to be able to provide funding? Grant accountant replies, we still need to do verification. All right, we're all good. And now we have crisis averted. So we can see, that the managing director or the finance lead was able to follow, I guess, their established controls. And they identified that, hey, that this was not right. There's a mismatch and we're not going to be able to make the payment. So kind of crisis averted. You can see they looped in a whole bunch of extra people in this conversation. But again, you can see how the thread goes from the hacker taking over a couple of accounts at an organization and then using that to target the foundation in an effort to divert funds into their account. So whenever you look at this, Carol, like, what do you see?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I mean, this looks so familiar to the case that I was referring to earlier, and some other cases. I think the finance folks, they're already many times overloaded. They're working hard. They're trying to get things done, so they're trying to be responsive, and they often are falling prey to this because they're not they're trying to check something off and get it paid and be helpful. We've seen this, and it was interesting. A lot of the string that you showed is it was, on a Friday in August, and I think that those fraudsters, they in the case that I had, it was right around a major holiday. So they use that time. They know that people are, want to get things done and want to get things crossed off. So you know, they could fall for it. In this case, they were lucky that somebody was paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, really, kind of scary stuff. And we can kind of see why it's really important to have those protections on the account, because if you have a compromised account at your organization, that represents a liability and can be used to exploit relationships that your organization has with other partners. So let's talk about one more type of attack. And actually, I have a quiz for all of you. So I want you to pick out the legitimate domain names. So again, so there are 3 legitimate domain names here. So I'm wondering if you can pick out the right ones. So we're talking about typo squatting. Also, it's called URL hijacking. So that's where you've got a number of different domains. And if you want to, click in there, I want to see it. Which ones are the legitimate here. All right, so I'm watching. I'd love to get everybody in here. See who can pick out the correct names. So I'll leave this open for another few seconds. And all right, we'll go ahead and oh, looks like people are getting in. I see some successful and some unsuccessful things as well here. So let's see. All right, so this was the results. So looks like people. So the legitimate domain. So IDFC First Bank. All right, let's see if that's right. Let's see what else. Grameen Kota with 1 O and PhoenixLegal.in. So actually, the Grameen, it's KOOTA, so that's the legitimate domain. KOTA is not. I think people figured out, yes, IDFC First Bank has an I. First Bank is missing an I. And then Phoenix Legal, so we see the same domain prefix, different suffix there. So we have Phoenix Legal registered in the Netherlands versus registered in India. So again, in this case, we're talking about an organization that was actually working in India. So so we can see amongst the audience, we got some folks that would have gotten taken. So this example that we're going to talk about is how fraudsters had a really well-planned and well-executed attack that would have been, I think, an 8-figure financial loss had it been successful. So in this case, it's likely that there were, multiple exploits in use, compromises at multiple different organizations that gave these fraudsters insight into how and when to attack. So that you can see, we'll see that they registered domain names and were launching a very sophisticated kind of multi-threaded attack. So again, Grameen Kuta, we've got IDFC Bank, we have a legal entity. So all of these elements were in play with this example here. So again, we can see the email from somebody at IDFC First Bank, no I, to a legitimate or an illegitimate recipient, the DR Manjunath at Kota 1O, CC'd a legitimate person at the organization, 2 O's. We also have 1 O. And then we're CCing somebody at PhoenixLegal.nl, which is controlled by the hacker, along with this account as well. Again, it starts off in a similar way. Previous bank account is unavailable due to technical error. here, so the bank itself is providing the updated alternative trust bank details in the attached. Hey, sorry for the inconvenience. So this is a little bit of a shorter analysis that we have, but again, we can see in this case, again, as I mentioned, we've got typo squatting accounts where the hackers created and registered domain names that were very similar to banking and funding organizations. And then we have a follow-up from there. Again, I think it's also interesting, right? So we've got the email address is from what the hacker controls, which is Grameen Kota with 1 O, but they have the legitimate website. So again, if you were just kind of looking at this, you clicked on the website, you went to the right website, but if you clicked on and replied to the email, it went to a domain that was under the control of the hackers. So again, we actually have this from Grameen Kota. This is confirmed and approved. And so they went through the whole process, and multiple parties reviewed and approved this before it was stopped again at our client, who again had more sophisticated financial controls that required significant process changes if a wire address was changed, and so it was stopped kind of at the last minute when somebody was getting ready to do kind of the final checks. So yeah, I'm curious, Carole, what do you kind of see in these cases?
Well, I think you really covered it all really well, Matt. And I loved the interactive way. I think, I just want to be mindful of the time. So we probably want to jump to the tips, the financial processes and IT tools. So we know fraud happens. All right. And we've already talked about the best defense is heightened awareness. And this covers, the entire fraud landscape. But when it comes to cybersecurity, there are two policies that I want to mention. One is the privacy policy. You should establish a privacy policy. There's some great samples on Charity Navigator. They have a sample privacy policy, as does the Council of Nonprofits have a great privacy policy. And this should, talk about what personal information is collected and how the organization may use that information. The other policy that I want to mention is a data breach response plan. Matt has brought that up. Of course, the only thing worse than a data breach is multiple data breaches. So you need to have a data breach response plan. And this should include reporting protocols. Who do you tell and when? What is the response team roles and responsibilities? You want to assemble that team of experts, legal, insurance, and accounting and IT. And you want to, make sure you come up with your communications strategy. Reach out to the cyber breach insurance, reach out to your insurance broker, and of course, notify law enforcement, the FBI, the Attorney General, whoever is appropriate. And then next, we're going to just talk about, the zero tolerance policy. There was a report released earlier in 21 by Verizon that looked at cyber attacks on businesses and found that 85% of the breaches resulted from somebody making a mistake, such as falling for a phishing email. So again, that training is really critical, because we know that either they're busy or they're naive, but that's why that training is really important. And I will say here, if fraud occurs and your staff does not tell you in a timely manner, that's a problem. We did have some of our cases where the employee was ultimately terminated, not necessarily for falling for the phishing scam, but for not communicating it in a timely manner. So, if fraud happens, it should be a drop everything and communicate it as immediately, even if you don't have the whole story yet. And because once that trust is broken, and if someone doesn't report it because they're trying to maybe not come clean about it, that's probably a cause for termination. I think we can go quickly through the next slide. This gets into payroll and high risk areas, which I will just mention. We have seen fraud that technically it is wire fraud. Wire fraud being financial fraud involving the use of telecommunications or information technology. We had a nonprofit in Boston where the COO was able to steal money through wire transfers. So just always have it to look at. It's not just external. I mean, we used to always be focused on helping prevent and detect fraud internally, and now with all these scams, we're looking externally. But don't forget to look internally as well. This is again, technically a case of wire fraud. So look at all those high risk areas where cash is involved and payroll is involved. Okay, and then as we said, when fraud does occur, you need to have that policy and procedure to guide employees on the proper steps to take. We work with your IT and your accounting folks to come up with a fraud work plan. In the case of one of our clients, we came up with some steps. Right away, hold an emergency board meeting. Investigate further. Fraudsters rarely restrict their activities to only one method, so you need to block access and so forth. So again, the data breach policy and the cyber insurance is really important here. And then we can go on to the next slide. Again, always be skeptical. It's a lot of times it's just common sense. Avoid using public Wi-Fi. Don't use the same word for multiple sites. We always tell people that, but again, these things still keep happening. And I will just mention in one of the cases of our client, we had recommended that they look at their cyber enterprise risk management policy, because a lot of times insurance companies are now, carving that out. And they did, in this case, take our recommendation. And then unfortunately, in the next year, did fall victim. So the insurance, was there to protect them. But that's also something that if you haven't looked at, we recommend that you consult specifically with an insurance broker familiar with the nonprofit sector. And I think in the interest of time, we can probably skip ahead, Matt, to talking about some of the technology training of best practices.
Yeah, and I see Carolyn has been busy chatting away and putting in some helpful links as well. So we have a number of different resources available. And so we will make those available. So again, I'll just go over these quickly and kind of get to the finalized kind of best practice checklist that I think combines the IT security controls. And so as we talked about in the beginning, the best defense is to have a trained and aware and engaged staff. And so security awareness training is really the best way to do that. We like online programs that allow you to kind of test and measure progress around people's ability to identify phishing messages, and then just get tips and tricks and kind of keep it front of mind. Along with that, we see that multi-factor authentication is absolutely critical to preventing those compromised accounts from happening in the first place. In 2020, whenever we did our incident report, we saw that about 97% of the account compromises that we responded to were with clients that had not implemented multi-factor authentication, and I think that's a number that kind of continues. So again, if you have not implemented multi-factor authentication already, that's a great next step to take. And then, I think Carole can talk a little bit about those finance processes to help keep your organization secure.
Sure. So when we talk about, a fraud prevention toolkit, and the tools that you should have, we always talk about sort of three important buckets. One is that tone at the top. That's making sure that you are deterring any sort of fraud from happening. Conducting complete background investigations, making sure that people understand ethical behavior. That would get to, someone, if they do fall victim to one of these cyber crimes, maybe they would be more apt to report it right away because they have that tone at the top and it's understood that there is zero tolerance, and they would, come forward. So that's an important piece. And then, we always talk about segregation of duties and making sure that folks, there's checks and balances and reconciliations. And of course, the last part, the policies and procedures, is that third bucket. And that's where, the insurance and the governance policies, but also that cybersecurity training for staff is one of our, most important tools in the toolkit.
Great. Yeah, and I think once you have those kind of policies and procedures and training and education, I think then you can move on to maybe investing in some more of those technology solutions. I will, say, like, none of these are foolproof. So, it's very rare that you're going to get an email protection solution that's going to block every bad thing from coming in. And so we can help block some, and maybe even a lot, but a certain amount of that stuff is going to go through. And so that's why that initial investment in your staff and training and process is really so important. So if I know we're at time, and so I want to hand it back over to Carolyn to kind of wrap us up and to talk about how they can continue to stay engaged with us.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, thank you so much, everyone who has stuck with us. And I see many of you have. This was such a great topic, and I'm sorry that we only had an hour for it. I feel like we could have talked a lot longer. Just for people who were asking in the chat, we will be posting this recording. And I also put it out as a podcast episode, and we'll have a transcript as well. But because we had to skip a couple of the slides there, we will also put up a PDF with all of the slides so you can see the best practices and tips that we kind of had to speed through a little bit there. Our next webinar for Community IT is Wednesday, March 16th. We're super excited. It's a webinar on diverse perspectives on thriving in nonprofit tech careers. It's going to be a panel of 3 amazing women of color in different tech roles talking about creating inclusive workplaces. And it'll be at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. You can register on our site. And I just want to thank everyone for the great questions today. And thank you so much, Carole and Matt, for sharing your experiences with us and helping us put together these tips and best practices to prevent financial fraud at nonprofits. And I know I could definitely see myself and organizations I've been at that could easily fall for a lot of these different situations. And it just shows you how easy it is and how vital it is to, as you said, Carole, to cultivate that attitude of skepticism. With the executive director, really email me about this if it's that important. So I just feel like you gave us a lot of great stuff to think about and talk about. So I'm just going to recap quickly our learning objectives and the takeaways. So we talked about specific types of financial fraud that use technology, including wire fraud, sending actual money to a different bank account than you meant to. The financial processes you can use to prevent that fraud, to add that extra layer onto your regular IT tools that you use for cybersecurity, such as multi-factor authentication, having regular training with your staff so that they know how to spot those phishing emails or the spoofed domain names that we went through. We talked about the importance of creating a strong internal culture around financial precautions, and also about training your staff not just on steps to take to avoid that fraud, but also when you detect fraud, to have established procedures to report it immediately, and that includes, if you're the one who clicked on the fake account. And that workforce and workplace environment is something that has to come from leadership, that your executives need to own as a part of their fraud prevention efforts. So I think I got out of this that you can't just turn on an IT tool and have that protect you. It really starts with your people. And you can have all the IT tools in the world, and we have a lot of IT tools available to us. But if you don't have that training and that skepticism and that leadership, the tools themselves aren't going to be able to help you. And that just, we talked at the beginning about it's financially so important to be able to prioritize taking the time now to have those procedures and that training and that attitude, because you will be paying for it later if you don't do it now. And finally, we provided a very rapid, informal wrap up of these tips and best practices. So we will have those available on our site as well. If you need further advice or consulting, you can always follow up with us. But I want to just make sure I give a disclaimer that we can't, Community IT and YPTC are not offering specific financial or legal advice in this webinar. This is for a general audience. You should talk directly to your organization's accountants or your counsel about any specific questions you have about anything that might relate to financial fraud. If you see it, if you need to say something, that's something you need to take up with your organization directly. In fact, that's one of the messages in this webinar, is that you need to know who to report to and how to report it when you see something that's suspicious. So I want to thank you again all for joining us. Thanks for going over a couple minutes, and thanks again, Carole and Matt.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. Looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks.